Close your eyes and imagine the average subway car during rush hour. Now, imagine a caveman sitting next to you. Believe it or not, the caveman is the one who smells like fresh mountain air, while you are the one producing the funk. It sounds counterintuitive, but there is a biological mystery buried in our sweat glands that explains why modern humanity is a walking perfume advertisement. To understand why we smell, we have to look at the 3 types of sweat glands in the human body. First, there are the eccrine glands. These are all over your body. They produce a watery sweat meant to cool you down when your internal temperature spikes. They are basically your biological air conditioning. They are odorless, colorless, and highly efficient. Then there are the apocrine glands. These are the troublemakers. You find them mostly in your armpits and your groin. These glands don't just pump out water. They secrete a thick, milky fluid packed with proteins and lipids. On its own, this fluid is also odorless. It is essentially a sterile nutrient broth sitting on your skin. So if the sweat is odorless, why does the gym locker room smell like a chemical attack? The answer is bacteria. Your skin is home to a massive ecosystem of microbes, specifically a genus called Staphylococcus and another called Corynebacterium. These bacteria see your apocrine sweat as an all-you-can-eat buffet. They gobble up the proteins and fats, and as a byproduct of their digestion, they release volatile organic compounds. That gas is what we call body odor. If this is happening to all of us, why didn't ancient humans deal with it? The answer lies in a specific genetic mutation that appeared roughly 40,000 years ago. This mutation is known as the ABCC11 gene. Scientists have identified that this gene is responsible for determining the type of earwax you have and how much your apocrine glands secrete. In East Asian populations, a specific mutation in the ABCC11 gene effectively shuts down the secretion of those smelly proteins in your armpits. If the bacteria don't have the protein buffet, they starve. If they starve, they can't produce the stench. For the vast majority of human history, humans were not scrubbing themselves with antibacterial soap. We were living in caves and forests with no showers for months at a time. Yet we didn't evolve to be overwhelmingly pungent. Why not? Evolution is a brutal filter. If your body odor was so offensive that it prevented you from finding a mate or triggered a predator's nose from a mile away, you didn't pass on your genes. There was a natural equilibrium. But then we invented civilization. Starting around 10,000 years ago, with the agricultural revolution, our lives changed. We moved from small, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups into dense, sedentary villages. We started living in close quarters with livestock. Our diets shifted from varied game and foraged plants to heavy grain-based diets. This change in diet had a massive impact on our skin chemistry. A study published in the journal Chemical Senses suggests that the modern Western diet, high in processed sugars, sulfur-rich vegetables, and red meat, changes the metabolic profile of our sweat. When you consume high amounts of red meat, you are saturating your body with compounds that bacteria love to break down. You are literally feeding your armpit bacteria a more potent fuel source than your ancestors ever consumed. But there is a darker irony here. Our modern obsession with hygiene is actually making the problem worse. In the 19th century, before the mass production of deodorant, people mostly relied on washing with water and occasionally applying perfumes. We had a healthy microbiome on our skin. When you use modern heavy-duty antiperspirants and antibacterial soaps, you aren't just killing the bad bacteria, you are nuking your entire skin microbiome. You create a vacuum. When the bacteria eventually return, and they always return, the most aggressive, stench-producing strains are the first to recolonize your skin. By trying to eliminate the smell, we have inadvertently encouraged the growth of the very bacteria that create the most offensive odors. Consider the Maasai people of East Africa, or the Yanomami of the Amazon. These groups often maintain lifestyles closer to our ancestors. They don't use mass-produced deodorants, yet they don't suffer from the same pervasive, sharp odors that we associate with unwashed bodies in industrialized nations. Their gut health, their lack of processed industrial chemicals, and their stable microbial communities keep their scent profile neutral. We also have to look at the psychological shift. In the Middle Ages, people were not nearly as obsessed with masking natural human scent. In fact, historical records show that in 16th century Europe, natural human scent was considered a part of personal identity. It wasn't until the rise of the industrial middle class and the invention of marketing in the early 20th century that body odor was rebranded from a natural biological state to a social taboo. The first commercial deodorant, Mum, hit the market in 1888. It didn't take off immediately. It required a massive psychological marketing campaign to convince the public that they were in fact offensive. They turned a biological function into a source of shame. So, what is the reality? We are currently caught in a cycle. We eat foods our ancestors never saw, which changes our sweat composition. That sweat feeds bacteria that thrive in our now sterile, chemically altered environments. We then use products that strip our skin, forcing those bacteria to become more aggressive to survive. If you stopped using deodorant for a month, you would smell smell terrible for the first 2 weeks. Your body would be reacting to the sudden lack of chemical interference, but if you survived that, your skin microbiome would eventually reach a new, more stable equilibrium. The bacteria would stabilize, and your natural scent would shift. It begs the question, are we actually smelly, or have we just spent the last 100 years training our noses to find our own biology repulsive? We have spent millennia evolving to be highly social animals, yet we are currently living in a state of constant war with the very microbes that call us home. Maybe the reason we struggle with body odor isn't because of a failure of hygiene, but because we have drifted so far from the biological conditions we were evolved for. We are trying to be perfectly clean in a world that requires a healthy living ecosystem on our skin to function properly. The next time you reach for that stick of antiperspirant, ask yourself, are you masking a natural human scent, or are you just trying to scrub away the fact that you're a biological organism living in an artificial world? Perhaps the most civilized thing we can do isn't to hide our scent, but to understand exactly why we're so afraid of it. This isn't just a hygiene story, it's a mate selection story too. In 1995, a Swiss researcher named Klaus Wedekind ran what became known as the sweaty t-shirt study. He had men wear the same shirt for 2 nights without deodorant, soap, or cologne, then asked women to smell the shirts and rate them. The women consistently preferred the scent of men whose immune system genes, specifically a group called the MHC, or major histocompatibility complex, were most different from their own. Genetically diverse offspring tend to have stronger immune systems, so your nose, whether you like it or not, has been running a genetic compatibility test on every person you've ever stood close to. Deodorant doesn't just mask a smell, it jams a signal that evolution spent millions of years building. So when we talk about eliminating body odor, we're not talking about removing something useless, we're talking about silencing a communication channel. And that raises an uncomfortable question: what exactly are we optimizing for when we chase odorlessness? Not health, not attraction, at least not in the evolutionary sense. We're optimizing for social acceptability in enclosed, artificially ventilated spaces, offices, subway cars, elevators, environments that didn't exist for 99.9% of human history. Let's talk about what antiperspirants actually do, because most people conflate them with deodorants, and the mechanisms are completely different. Deodorants work on the bacteria and the smell. Antiperspirants work on the sweat itself. The active ingredient in most antiperspirants is an aluminum-based compound, usually aluminum chlorohydrate or aluminum zirconium. When you apply it, the aluminum ions react with the water in your sweat and form a gel plug that physically clogs the eccrine and apocrine ducts. You're not stopping the glands from producing sweat. You're stopping it from reaching the surface. Your body still tries to cool itself and still tries to secrete those proteins. The plug just blocks the exit. This matters because it means your armpit becomes a stagnant environment. The sweat that isn't blocked pools under the skin, and the small amount of bacteria that survive the antibacterial assault now have a warm, moist, nutrient-rich reservoir to feed on, with less air exposure to dry things out. It's less like sterilizing a room and more like sealing a room with a half-eaten sandwich still inside it. There's a concept from immunology that applies almost perfectly here, called the hygiene hypothesis. Originally, it was used to explain why children raised in ultra-clean, sanitized environments have higher rates of allergies and autoimmune conditions than children raised on farms or in households with pets and siblings. The immune system, deprived of the microbial exposure it evolved to expect, starts overreacting to harmless things like pollen or peanuts. Skin microbiologists now apply a similar logic to body odor. A skin ecosystem that's constantly being wiped out and left to recolonize in a stripped alkaline environment behaves differently than one that's been left largely undisturbed for years. It doesn't reach a calm equilibrium. It stays in a kind of chronic recovery mode, dominated by whichever bacterial species can grow fastest in a hostile environment, which are often not the mild, low-odor strains. This is part of why, over the last decade, a small industry has emerged around bacterial deodorants, or skin probiotic sprays, most famously a product line originally developed by a company called AOBIME, marketed under the brand Mother Dirt. Instead of killing bacteria, these products introduce a specific strain, Nitrosomonas eutropha, an ammonia-oxidizing bacterium that isn't part of the odor-producing family at all. The idea is to recreate the kind of skin ecosystem humans had before daily showers and soap, one built around bacteria that metabolize ammonia from sweat rather than the sulfur compound-producing strains that create classic body odor. Early research on these products showed mixed but genuinely interesting results, particularly for people who had gone through the transitional detox period of quitting antiperspirants. Diet deserves a second, closer look too, because it's not just red meat. Sulfur-rich vegetables, garlic, onions, and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cabbage contain compounds that are metabolized into volatile sulfur byproducts, some of which are excreted directly through sweat glands, not just just through breath. There's well-documented research, including studies on garlic consumption, showing that people rate the body odor of high garlic diets as measurably more unpleasant than low garlic diets, and this isn't subtle, it shows up in controlled smell tests within hours of consumption. Alcohol works similarly. Your liver can only break down so much ethanol at once, and the metabolic byproducts, particularly acetic acid, get partially expelled through sweat, which is why a hard night of drinking tends to leave a distinct sour smell in your pores the next morning that no amount of deodorant fully masks. Stress sweat is its own category worth separating out, because it isn't primarily about temperature regulation at all. When you're anxious or under acute stress, your apocrine glands, the same troublemakers from earlier, get triggered by adrenaline rather than heat. This is why a nervous job interview or a first date can make you sweat through your shirt in a cold room. It's not thermoregulation. It's a much older, more primal signal tied to the same fight-or-flight chemistry that widens your pupils and speeds your heart. Some researchers have proposed that this stress sweat, being processed almost immediately by nearby bacteria into distinct volatile compounds, may have once functioned as a chemical alarm signal to others nearby, the biological equivalent of a smoke detector. Put all of this together, and the picture that emerges isn't really about smell at all. It's about how quickly human culture can outrun human biology, and how much damage gets done in that gap. Our genes still expect a diet of varied, low-processed food. Our skin still expects a stable, largely undisturbed microbial community. Our noses still expect to receive honest chemical signals about the people around us. Instead, we've built a world of processed sugar, antibacterial soap, air-conditioned offices, and heavily marketed insecurity, and then acted surprised when our bodies didn't adapt to it in a single century. Maybe the caveman on the subway isn't fresher because he's dirtier. He's fresher because, in every sense that matters biologically, he's more in sync with the environment his body was built to live in. We're the ones who left that environment behind, and we've been trying to spray, scrub, and plug our way out of the consequences ever since.